session 2, named Soft Power, Cultural Agency Networks and Exhibitions. And when we prepare the sessions, maybe we thought that it was a good nomination, Soft Power, but after reading the papers, I'm not sure. So maybe we'll find out during the presentations what we understand by soft power. And the first speaker is Isabel Plante. She holds a PhD in art history from the School of Philosophy and Letters in Universidad de Buenos Aires. She's a researcher of Conicet, which is a very important research place in Argentina. And she has had several scholarship by Conicet and Plante Foundation, and her doctoral thesis was published in Argentina in 2013, named Argentines of Paris, Art and Cultural Travels During the 60s, and she's continuing that investigation now, I think.
Well, thank you, Olga, and I want to thank the organization, Paula, and all the team working. This is a great opportunity to share my new work. So I will be reading in English. I hope it works. In the mid of April 1978, the Chilean newspaper La Segunda described the international circulation of handmade tapestries, arpilleras, or arpilleras in the Argentine way, produced in the most precarious neighborhoods surrounding Santiago. The article, titled "The Tapestries of Deformation," declared that the arpilleras, bearing openly Marxist messages, and that's a quote from the newspaper, were being sold in the United States, Sweden, and France. An unnamed reader had discovered them at an exhibition in France and had purchased some of whose images were included in the article. The alleged reader had also found out the name of who was secretly receiving the shipments in Paris, André Jacques. The exhibition referred to in the unsigned article might have been one of these soirées solidaires coordinated by the Comité Intermouvement auprès des Évacués, CIMAD, an organization headed by the mentioned André Jacques. After the military coup in Chile in September 1973, CIMAD had been sheltering exiled Chileans and organizing sales of the arpilleras, which in fact Jacques and his wife Geneviève Camus received by airmail. Oops. The information about the shipments to Paris obtained by La Segunda mostly likely came from the fact that the Chilean customs had seized a package of arpilleras 2 months before the article was published. A letter dated 9 February 1978, addressed to the Jacques and discreetly signed workshops, declared that the last shipment had been confiscated in a routine procedure and added, and I'm quoting the letter, "Please do not claim the shipment to the air company nor to us." End of quote. Probably the Chilean government had become aware of the good reception of the arpilleras overseas and had increased custom controls. They also tried to control public opinion by publicizing the defamatory nature of the tapestries through the media. The truth is that any Chilean traveling abroad in the late 70s could have had the chance of finding arpilleras exhibited in different cities worldwide. With the help of human rights organizations and cultural figures, clandestine shipments of arpilleras were being sent abroad to be displayed at solidarity exhibitions with the aim of raising support for the resistance against the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet in Chile. We have already traced that in 1977 and 1978 there had been exhibitions of arpilleras in the cities of Nancy, Nanterre, Avignon, Colombes, Madrid, Valencia, Barcelona, Glasgow, Birmingham, London, Stockholm, La Habana, Mexico, and Los Angeles. Under the protection of the Vicaría de la Soledad, Vicariate of Solidarity, I think that's the pronunciation, but I'm not sure, of the Archdiocese of Santiago, the arpilleras were handmade with fabric remnants by women who needed to provide for their households, as their husbands were unemployed, imprisoned, or disappeared. Most of these modest-sized tapestries, about 60 per 45 centimeters, more or less, depicted episodes or scenes of the daily harsh life in the shanty towns in the context of dictatorship. This paper proposes to understand the materiality of Chilean arpilleras in relation to the construction of international networks of solidarity and to what can be called a soft resistance against the dictatorship, built through this non-specialized craft production. By studying the arpilleras and their circulation overseas, I seek to historize their consolidation as emblematic visual artifacts of a Latin America with a revolutionary vocation, and to shed light on the tensions between the cultural representations of the high arts and the low arts, and those are between quotes, and the geographical representations of the First World and the Third World, which were relevant during that period. So the arpilleras production. The Chilean article about the tapestries of defamation showed the image of several craftworks, including 3 arpilleras. Each arpillera had a caption describing the depicted scene, and I quote a couple of them. Women with small children collecting garbage to survive. Or a head of household desperate for being out of job is forced to make his daughters prostitute themselves. As you can see, the only arpillera the newspaper printed in color was remarkably similar in theme, composition, and colorfulness to the one selected for the cover of the book on Chilean arpilleras published by CIMAD, the French organization I just mentioned, 1 year before in 1977, which was entitled Un peuple brode sa vie et sa lutte. The caption under the image on the French book covers reads, "The families of the detainees disappeared, struggling to reach them in spite of all the obstacles." The caption in the Chilean newspaper is quite more detailed, and I'm quoting it. This tapestry, made and conceived by the craft people of the Vicariate of Solidarity, depicts a group of women and children trying to visit their family members who are imaginarily detained at Dos Alamos. Hundreds of these craftworks have been sent overseas through this archdiocese organization with the goal of discrediting the government. End of quote. The place referred as Dos Alamos was probably the Tres Alamos detention camp. This detention camp, located in one of the most populated areas of Santiago, was run by the Directorate of National Intelligence, the DINA, the secret police of Pinochet's dictatorship. Unlike other detention camps in Chile, prisoners at Tres Alamos were identified and allowed to receive visitors. Some of the many political detainees who were imprisoned there included José Salaquet, director of legal department of the Committee of Cooperation for Peace in Chile, known as Comité Pro Paz, and Luis Corbalán, the general secretary of Chilean Communist Party, together with the family members of the arpillera makers who had been arrested for serving as union representatives, for being militants of communism or socialism, or for participating in the revolutionary left movement, the MIR. The composition in both arpilleras is divided horizontally into 3 registers. I'll be right back to those images. The register in the middle, I can go back. The register in the middle, made with a stripe of grayish-green fabric, shows a front wall resembling the one that separated the Tres Alamos prison from the streets. You can see it there. As well as in other arpilleras, the trees flanking the scene alluded to the name of the detention camp. In the lower register, is it out of focus? It's me. In the lower register, standing in front of the wall, there are human figures laid out in 2 rows on a pale color fabric. Male and female, adults and children that we can recognize by their outfits and heights. The figures are small-sized in relation to the large wall. We see their backs as they're facing the wall. Their arms are raised, apparently toward the hands made of gray cloth, which appear above the wall, equidistant from each other. The outfits are made of varied ambivalent colors, red, yellow, pink, blue, or patterned fabrics, sharply contrasting with the gray color of the hands above the wall, which seems to belong to the political prisoners. In the upper register, the tapestry, we can distinguish the tops of some trees and several buildings, with some snowy mountain peaks and a blue sky in the background. We can decode the scenes thanks to the printed captions and the handwritten notes that the arpillera makers used to attach to little pockets sewn on the backside of the tapestries, but mainly due to their detailed and clear composition. The Vicariato de la Solidaridad had a central role in the making of the tapestries. Firstly, they trained the arpillera makers on the technique of the appliqué, the creation of designs by sewing cloth remnants, as well as on how to compose landscapes, combine colors, use stencils or patterns, cut the cloth, and produce proportionate human figures. The Vicariado also held weekly meetings with each group of arpillera makers, where they discussed from the composition and the finish to the social relevance and the truthfulness of the depicted scenes. The Vicariado teachers determined the standard size of the arpilleras and told the arpillera makers to observe the shanty town and the streets carefully, looking at buses, protests, and police vans or barricades on fire, and to depict what they saw. They also instructed them in how to identify the essential element in their experience and summarize an idea. In effect, many arpilleras showed the family visiting the detention camps, as we've already examined, while others narrated scenes of police repressions or the extreme poverty in the shanty towns. In turn, there were also arpilleras showing scenes of soup kitchens, income groups, arpillera workshops, and other initiatives to fight poverty. Many of these actions were led by organizations under the Archdiocese of Santiago, firstly the Comité Pro Paz, and later the Vicariado de la Solidaridad, after the committee was dissolved by Pinochet's government in December 1975. While the main goal of the arpillera makers was to generate income to support their households, these groups also became networks of support, relief, and reflection, which helped them to understand how the extreme poverty was rooted in the neoliberal policies implemented by the de facto government, and provide them also with legal advice when their family members were imprisoned or disappeared. Regarding the success of this undertaking, we know that the first workshops of the arpilleras began operating in 1975, mostly as a result of previous women income groups. The increase of production by mid-1976 is described by an arpillera maker's testimony, and I quote her: "I started making one arpillera weekly, but as it is my only source of income, I am now producing 3 per week." According to Jacqueline Adams' research, over the first year, the number of arpilleras makers grew to about 120. Then the number remained stable for 2 years due to the difficulties in selling the arpilleras. But from 1978 arpillera making began to spread in all shantytowns. By 1979, there were about 280 arpilleristas working, and by the early 80s, the number of arpilleristas grew to near 340. No doubt, the alarms in the Chilean press were related to this striking growth. The Pinochetista newspaper was also right regarding the Vicariado's central role in providing the materials to the arpillera makers and in organizing the increasingly larger shipments overseas. The growth of production was directly linked to the growth of demand, thanks to the success of the Vicariado in developing a distribution network abroad that allowed it to buy the arpillera makers' work. In fact, the women said that they were able to make as many as they wished, knowing that the Vicariado would buy them. The total figures estimated by Adams are striking. Approximately 100,000 arpilleras were made in Santiago metropolitan region over the 16 years of the dictatorship, and most of them were sent abroad. The fact that the two arpilleras examined above were so similar to one another accounts for the fact that the growth of demand in the late 70s led to a greater standardization of themes and compositions. Typical themes included the laundresses or el comedor, with children around the table. The Vicariado staff used to suggest a theme based on a particular order it had received or its perception of what would sell. So if the Vicariado articulated the clandestine exploitation of the arpilleras, it also exercised considerable control over their content and form. The Vicariado's teachers and staff looking over the group's arpilleras would give feedback and demand corrections. The women knew which sorts of themes the Vicariado would buy and which it would not. And they knew their arpilleras were meant to be about poverty, survival strategies, repression, and resistance, and so they chose this subject matter. During 1976, at least 2 exhibitions of arpilleras with Christian themes were held in Paulina Waug's gallery in Santiago. But an attack against the gallery in the early 1977 sent a clear message that exhibiting the arpilleras in Chile would not be longer possible. This is one of the arpilleras exhibited in one of those exhibitions. From then on, the Vicariate would continue displaying the arpilleras discreetly inside their buildings or at Christmas fairs, but the exhibitions open to the public would be held exclusively overseas, and the arpilleras would acquire a more explicit tone of denunciation. The impact in Europe. In the prologue to Simad's book on arpilleras of 1977, André and Geneviève Jacques expressed to will to raise awareness about the situation in Chile by means of those textile crafts and the testimonies of the women who made them. They wished to contribute to building and multiplying, and I quote them, all sorts of forms of solidarity with the Chilean resistance. This included, end of quote, this included raising money for the Vicariado de la Solidaridad by selling the arpilleras and other items. According to the testimonies given to Jacqueline Adams, between 1975 and 1981, the Jacks sold about 1,000 arpilleras, and between 1976 and 1978, they sold 150,000 postcards with photos of the arpilleras and 35,000 copies of the book. The circulation of the arpilleras in Europe took varied forms, and as many people were willing to raise support for the Chilean resistance. This can be seen by leafing through the pages of Canto Libre, a modest Chilean magazine printed in the suburbs of Paris. This issue of the early 1978, for example, included an article entitled The Embroiderers of the Struggle, a promotion of André Jacques' book for sale for $10, and the announcement of 2 exhibitions taking place at that time that included the display of Arpilleras. Tapisserie populaire du Chili at the Maison des Jeunes et de la Culture de Colombes in France, and the International Museum of the Resistance Salvador Allende at the Moderna Museet in Stockholm. The spaces exhibiting Arpilleras in Europe were varied, from Chilean folk music gatherings, peñas, to Christian or secular human rights organizations, from trade union festivals to art galleries and museums. Judging by the press reviews, the exhibition at museums and galleries became a very successful strategy for building visibility. Chilean gallery owner Carmen Wu, the sister of the above-mentioned Paulina, and English art critic Guy Brett were outstanding figures among those who orchestrated Arpillera exhibition in the international arena, in the international cultural circuit. Brett organized a 52 Arpillera exhibition entitled "We Want People to Know the Truth: Patchwork Pictures from Chile," with the support of the British Council. This exhibition visited 3 cities. In October 1977, it was held at the Third Eye Centre in Glasgow. In December 1977, at the Icon Gallery in Birmingham, and in March 1978 at the Air Gallery in London. The exhibition comprised Arpilleras, craft works made by political prisoners, and photographs depicting the shanty towns and the political situation in Chile. In turn, the text written for the catalogue was disseminated in several magazines, such as the feminist Spare Rib. Good title, Spare Rib. When Brett was organizing these exhibitions in the early 1977, he sent a letter to Carmen Wu, thanking her for the arrangements and asking her about the possibility of adding more Arpilleras to the exhibition. And I am quoting that letter. Mata, that is Chilean artist Roberto Mata, has told me that he has arranged for 50 of the patchworks to be sent directly to London from Cuba, where they have been shown recently. This is a very good news. When I was in Paris last week, I heard from your daughter that you had 40 more patchworks in Madrid, which you would be willing to send to London. This is a great news as well. I would certainly like to borrow them. End of quote. This letter suggests that at least some of the Arpilleras exhibited by Brett in Great Britain had been the ones previously showed at Casa de las Américas in Cuba under the title The Embroiderers of Life and Death in January 1977. The tapestries had been sent to Casa de las Américas in Cuba by Carmen Wu herself, who was exiled in Spain. These Arpilleras were accompanied by a letter explaining that those 35 tapestries were intended to be later exhibited in London, Stockholm, and Madrid. In a recent testimony, Carmen recalls that during a visit to Chile in 1976, she purchased near 100 Arpilleras at her sister Paulina's gallery in Santiago. About half of them were later acquired by Roberto Mata, while she kept the rest with the intention of exhibiting them in Europe. It's highly probable that the 35 tapestries shown at Casa de las Américas were the ones exhibited as part of the International Museum of the Resistance Salvador Allende's exhibition in Europe from mid-1977 on. This museum had been propelled by a group of exiled intellectuals, including Carmen Wu, as a continuation and transformation of the Museo de la Solidaridad established during Allende's government to raise international support for his presidency. Unlike most of the works received by the International Museum of Resistance, the arpilleras were easy to transport over long distances due to the modest size and softness. And in some cases, they traveled back and forth between Europe and Latin America. When exhibited, the arpilleras stood out among the modern art pieces displayed with them. An article reviewing the International Museum of Resistance held in France in 1977 declared, and I'm quoting, "With burning hands and motherly hearts, these women express better than any great artist the daily drama of hunger, misery, desperation, and death, but also the daily miracle of solidarity." End of quote. The arpilleras were read as testimonies of the state violence and political persecution depicted in their content, but also their materiality linked to daily feminine domestic work conveyed the social marginality and the impoverished women who sew them. The power of this textiles craft lied paradoxically in their fragility, in the fact of being handmade, out of fabric remnants in a between naive and childlike, and these are quotes from the press of the time, naive and childlike manner by women without professional expertise. The arpilleras strike a chord with the Third World supporters in Europe, mired in the disappointment after the fall of Allende and everything that the Chilean road to socialism stood for. The arpilleras were thus embraced as an authentic manifestation of the Chilean people and of its most vulnerable and genuine expression, the mothers in poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I think we have some time for questions. Deborah?
Hello. Oh. Okay, it is working. Thank you so much for that paper. It's, the objects are amazing, and the address was very interesting, so thank you. I was fascinated to learn about the body that instructed the makers, the arpilleras, in sort of an acceptable repertoire of compositions and subject matter. And you touched on this several times, but I wondered if it could be brought to the fore slightly more. Also, the kind of standardization of aesthetics that secured the arpilleras' success in circulation. You mentioned just there in closing, what is implicit all along, that these works depend or convey and were crafted in order to convey a certain authenticity. And I mean, considering that there were, I assume there were documents about, this is how you make an arpillera. It was implicitly understood by these women making them that this is the aesthetic they were to produce. And actually, what it is it seems to me, is a virtuosic performance of a folk aesthetic. It's not really a question in here, but I wondered if you could speak a little more about the accepted aesthetic codes of the arpilleras and your thoughts on that in these materials and this topic.
Is there, if there are more questions, I think we can take them all.
Okay. I think
So there is you and Laura. And
thank you, Isabel. Very, very interesting, and the images are so fascinating. Also, I found important the role of the church in the questions of solidarity and how it's mediated, the image of resistance through religion. So it could be a point to stress if there were some kind of codes or moral codes. I suppose that family, very, very traditional roles of family must be conveyed through the arpilleras. But my question is more specific. Where are these arpilleras now? Who bought these arpilleras, and where are they? Where are the arpilleras? Because I wonder, we were actually before with Bojana talking about where are the archives of all this material, and it's important to talk about that. And I was wondering about this, and okay, I'll pass the micro to other questions, and then.
Yes. I'm not I don't have much information about it, but I understand that there's a very similar case in El Salvador that was recently recovered, and actually I think it's going to be presented in the Reina Sofia Museum.
Oh.
Well, as part of another exhibition, exhibition that has more objects and I don't know if you have any idea of other like possible projects in different countries, and also more in the stage of constructing memory, because in Colombia nowadays the Center for Historical Memory is creating like this kind of initiative with different people of the areas where the war was really like hard, and they are like doing some pieces like that are very similar and that are helping the community like to process the conflict. So maybe these sheets they use and of this kind of material.
Megan too.
Just a quick question/comment that also applies to Emily's paper from this morning, that I was wondering if there were any connections to California, to the Bay Area, to La Peña and Starry Plow, who have built very vocal solidarity networks with Chile, especially. Most of their work is in posters and that's still on the walls of the establishments today. But I'm not sure if they were also involved in the exchange of Arpilleras or not, or if you've come across anything like that. I'd be interested.
Shall I go? Okay. I don't know about La Peña. This is the first thing I write about the Arpilleras, and as you can see, they really spread out globally, so it's very difficult to seize. But I know that there was an exhibition at Los Angeles in 1978, so maybe that's her. I don't know. I don't know much about that exhibition, and I'm sure that there were many more. I mean, I have some more information about the 80s in the United States, but not in Los Angeles. So, but I'm taking notes because. Well, La Peña says a lot. The name of so. Then, about. El Salvador, I didn't know, but I do know about Colombia. I don't remember. I was trying to remember the name of the locality of the place, and they're strikingly similar to the Chilean ones. I think it's probably that the Chilean experience was so successful in many ways because it was somehow healing for the women. It brought money into the houses, like actual real money, and so I think it's being sort of retaken as a strategy to work on violence and stuff. The inspiration for these apparently are the molas in Panama and the kilt sort of work a little bit, I don't know, like all over, I would say, or the Anglo-Saxon folk crafts. But I think this is a very singular product. At the time, I mean, there's this standardization process, but it is somehow, put together with something about originality. I mean, I haven't seen previous works. One of the local reference is the Bordadoras de Isla Negra, who were discovered by Pablo Neruda and who had already exhibited in Europe in the late 60s or early 70s. And of course, Violeta Parra's Arpilleras. which are mentioned by the press in Europe, but also by some of the arpillera makers as local references. But they look very different, the other two cases. Maybe the bordadoras de Isla Negra are a little closer, but in fact that is actual bordado made with wool, and it's not the same technique. So then about the church and the moral codes, yes, Paula, there's a lot to be done there. I think that also that is maybe like the children images of the guerrilla, but in another sort of sense, I would say. That was, I think, also a sort of warranty of getting solidarity from, I mean, who wouldn't help a poor mother under a dictatorship in the third world? You should be like a very bad person not to be moved by that. So, I don't know. And the collections. Well, now, in fact, some of the collections built in Europe were sent to Santiago. Like the personal collection of André and Geneviève Jacques is now at the Museo de la Memoria in Santiago. Same thing with Paulina and Carmen Wog's collections and some others. But then I've seen, there was an exhibition of arpilleras in Buenos Aires, and you see their collections in Ireland, Japan, and so they're still, like the CIMAD, I've been able to see the CIMAD collection, which is a small, I would say, like a 15 set of arpilleras that is still in Paris under as part of the organization patrimony. So they're here and there, but many of them had come back to Chile, and you can see them. They change the display of those in the Museo de la Memoria every, I don't know, 2 weeks or something. And then, well, standardization on authenticity. I think that there's a very interesting issue over there. And well, there was, I mean, as far as I understand, and there I have to recognize Jacqueline Adams' work, because she made a lot of interviews with the arpillera makers, with the people who were staff of the Vicariado at that time. And clearly, at first, it was an initiative that had not a lot of enthusiasm by the Vicariate, because they were much into the legal issues, and they thought that was not really useful. But then when the money started coming, that changed the life of this woman. I mean, not radically, but at least they were able to feed their children. So then they started to take it seriously, and they trained them. So there was an artist who was hired, several maybe, and she was the one like settling the rules, or the standard sort of. And I think she was very clever. She tried something that it did work very well. This idea of making a craft be a document at the same time, something that would tell something about these people's lifestyle, and but they all had more or less the same sizes, and when I found that there were these two being so similar, and I said, but what's going on here? I mean, they look so alike. And also, maybe we have to think about the consumer, the one who's buying those to hang them on their houses, so they wouldn't maybe like a lot of blood on them. Anyway, I don't know. Jacqueline Adams says that some violent themes were banned, but I mean, I shown you one about torture, which has like a tool, how do you say this, transparent fabric. So you can kind of guess what's going on, but then you open it and it's a scene of torture. So there's a lot of blood too. So I'm not sure about some of them. Some of those issues. I should go on with that. Anyway, the amount of money, it's interesting because Geneviève Jacques, she has some correspondence, some letters with the Vicariate of Solidarity, sort of membrete at the top of the paper, but she wouldn't let me take a look at those. And I saw numbers on them with several zeros. So I really wanted to know, to have an idea of this, the flow, but she wouldn't let me. So, well, we don't know. Well,
whoa. Two more? Or quickly? No, three more? Okay, bueno, three, two. ¿A qué hora teníamos que acabar?
Oops.
Okay. Maybe we can, if the rest goes well, we can wait and have them later on?
Yes, I would say.
So, yeah? Okay. So we have 10 minutes for the coffee.
No, I think let's take 15.
15 minutes for the coffee.
Okay, let's have the coffee and then we can take again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we need to resume because the recording of the session stops at 6. So we need to have everything finished by that moment. So I'm gonna be quite strict with the timing.
But it's only 20
So-
minutes till 6.
Yes, and then we have Anita later on. But if you spend your time, then you will have less questions. So I think we can start. Let me introduce you, Juliane Debeusscher. She's a PhD candidate in art history at the University of Barcelona and here, Université Grenoble Alpes, with a fellowship from the Spanish Ministry of Science associated with Decentralized Modernities project. And her research addresses the circulation and visibilization of Central European art across the Iron Curtain during the late Cold War, and she has written in several publications. Well, I left you with her.
Thank you. So thank you to the organizers for this wonderful conference, and I am happy to be here and share some of my recent research. So I have to say that I will abandon the emotional stream we were into until now. I am sorry for that, but I will deal mostly with the circulations of ideas and some images also, but mostly photographs and documents rather than artistic productions, and also the idea of the creation of artistic networks. So this paper presents a series of events and actions that aimed at establishing a transnational community in resistance across the Cold War's divides and polarizations. This community gathered around the idea of art as a social practice, operating in the context of reality, close to the idea of contextual art coined by the Polish artist and theoretician Jan Zwijnski. While such attempts to raise and maintain a common front, as we will see, did not last very long, it was in 1 year actually, and remain mostly on the level of theoretical debates, they can tell us about the culture of engagement and the political imaginary shared in the 1970s by artists coming from different geopolitical and cultural environments, as well as the tensions and misunderstandings between their aspirations. So in the context of this conference, this case also invites to reflect on solidarity within an artistic network, its manifestations and also its limitations. The idea of a third front, was raised for the first time in an encounter organized in May 1977 at the École Sociologique Interrogative, a space in Paris belonging to the Collectif d'Art Sociologique, formed by Hervé Fischer, Fred Forest, and Jean-Paul Thénault. In a joint statement, the participants claimed for the constitution of a front opposed to the cultural hegemony imposed by the international, meaning capitalist, art market. The artists and cultural practitioners that had contributed to its formulation included the three members of the Collectif d'Art Sociologique, Jan Zwiczynski and Emil Sislar from Poland, Amerigo Marras, Suber Corley, Bruce Eves, Paul Woodrow, Brian Dyson and Diane Baudouet from Canada, Lauren Leeson and Peter Dunn from the UK, and Frank Gribling from the Netherlands. The third front statement focused on three aspects. The first emphasized the socially based character of its authors' practice and their will to contribute critically to a social transformation of society in order to achieve an, I quote, autogestive power base. The second point stressed the role of culture as an active catalyst for questioning ideology and struggling against the mechanism of appropriation inherent to the capitalist system. The third point, finally, acknowledged existing differences among the group, but insisted on its shared aims. The collective was in fact aware of its heterogeneity, as well as of intellectual and cultural differences among its members, coming from Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and North America. These differences were not a problem at all, the statement claimed, but rather allowed for the flourishing of different contextual perspectives, while the collective maintained its common objectives. When reading this statement, it is clear that this transnational alliance was laid out around the idea of emancipation from the grip and pressure of the international art market. New York still represented for these artists the epicenter of the art world, and they articulated their position in relation to it, somehow reinforcing its authority through this gesture. So this was, in a way, also a bit counterproductive as a statement. However, borrowing the term third to refer to their own position within the artistic realm, the members of the Third Front established their collective as a non-aligned organization in struggle, an alternative not only to the centralized capitalist art system, but also to the actual division between the capitalist and socialist, or state socialist to be more precise, systems of cultural production and diffusion. In this context, the term third referred less to a geopolitical and economic reality than to an imagined and desirable realm, a social space in resistance created beyond the Cold War's division, in the margins of its empires. In this marginal space, which was marginal from the point of view of its members, an attempt to set relations of mutual support and solidarity took place beyond differences, with the idea of social and contextual practices as a binding element, and of course as with English as an indisputable lingua franca. Communication, resistance, and self-organization were key principles in the Third Front's program of action. So here it is published in the journal Art and Communication from Toronto, which insisted in creating an international network of communication and in planning joint activities of both research and practice. The community needed specific places and situations to be activated. It did so between November 1976 and July 1977 through a few encounters, seminars, and conferences. First in Toronto, which is previously to the Paris seminar, then Paris, Warsaw, Kazimierz nad Wisła, and Warsaw again. Traces and testimonies of these meetings can be found in the form of published statements, notes, transcripts, and photographs belonging to artists and organizations' archives. And this is a work still in progress. I am still collecting information, so I have mostly worked on archives and materials from Toronto, Paris, and Poland. But for example, I am still looking for also testimonies from the English artists and other artists from other parts also. This material make possible reconstructed reconstructing a fragmented intellectual and material history of the Third Front's short lifetime. The three main promoters of the Third Front were Hervé Fischer, Jan Zwijnski, and Amerigo Maras. Based in Paris, Fischer was developing sociological art as a critical approach to the ideological meaning and function of art in society. He's actually the one who coined the formula Third Front, which mostly refers to the idea of third state, like tiers état, more than the idea of third world. Zwijnski, to whom I will return also in a moment, was the inventor of the contextual art theory, an art strategy born in the context of the People's Republic of Poland. Maras was an active networker, an Italian emigre in Toronto who had founded the CIAC, for Center for Experimental Art and Communication, an alternative yet publicly funded space in town. He synthesized the theories of Fischer and Zwijnski with some of his own in numerous writings and statements, mostly diffused in the journal Art Communication edition. Although each one had his own agenda and expectations regarding this alliance, they certainly contemplated the creation of the Third Front as an opportunity to strengthen their respective aims while setting a radical collective platform. The other participants, who all shared an interest for socially based practices, had joined the project via one of them. From an older generation than the other artists involved in the Third Front, Jan Zwijnski studied architecture and ballet, then painting and graphic arts at the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw. After an early career as a painter in the 50s and 60s, he became interested in issues like science, the structure of language, and communication. In 1975, Zwijnski was introduced to a group of art students at the International Festival of Artistic Schools of the Baltic States in Gdansk and started to support their work as a theorist. Among them were Romuald Kutera, Anna Kutera, and Lech Mrozek, who opened the recent art gallery in the city of Wrocław the same year. One of the first collaborations between Zwijnski and these artists was the exhibition Contextual Arts at the Gallery St. Petri in Lund, Sweden. In the framework of this event, of which he was the curator, Zwijnski published a booklet titled Art as Contextual Art, which started to circulate internationally and promote what appeared as a new artistic strategy born in Poland. The expression Polish contextualists became increasingly popular to refer to the group of artists close to the recent art gallery, and not only, also other artists. Zwijnski situated contextual art out of the sphere of aesthetics and considered it as a social act, performed and effective in reality. According to him, it aimed at creating new meanings corresponding with reality and to decompose the meanings that were outdated due to a change of object, time, place, situation, etc. Contextual arts was hence conceived as an instrument that co-constructed and co-created reality in opposition with conceptual art's self-referential process. And in his texts, Zwijnski was particularly a critic towards Joseph Kossut's Art After Philosophy that was published in 1969. It is not my aim here to analyze in depth the whole theoretical apparatus built by Zwijnski around the idea of contextual art, not either to discuss its relevance or obsolescence in relation to other theories, especially regarding conceptual art. What I would like to examine in change is the operability of contextual art, or the idea of contextual art, as a federative element, which brought artists together and led them to discuss the established order of the art system. Such potential lied precisely in contextual art's open and generic dimension, which was often criticized, which allowed it to function as a recipe for a socially concerned practice in a multiplicity of locations. And here again, quoting Zwijnski, there does not exist a morphology of contextual art. The only morphology which can be accepted is occasional morphology, viewed relativistically under pragmatic conditions. Its choice is a matter of strategy, and that is what justifies it. I come back now to the Third Front. To understand the origins of the Third Front, we should go back in time a few months before the Paris seminar. Amerigo Marras, who had discovered Zwijnski's writings on contextual art during a trip to Sweden, invited a group of artists and critics from Canada, United States, Poland, and France to Toronto to discuss these ideas on contextual art in November 1976. He wanted to put contextual art up for debate with artists that represented the purest trend of Anglo-American conceptual art, including Joseph Kossuth, Sarah Charlesworth, and some members of Art and Language. Now you have all the participants, the list of participants here. The transcripts from the Contextual Art Symposium reflect the participants' difficulties in finding a common ground for debate and abandoning self-defensive behaviors. Asked about their opinion on Zwijnski's ideas on contextual art, the artists from New York criticized a set of principles they considered too abstract and non-specific. Despite this, the discussions addressed a wide range of issues, like precisely taking position, artists' engagement with social change, the connection between social backgrounds and social consciousness, the role of art institutions, the inner contradictions at stake in this type of debates, the specificity of the Polish context, feminism also. For Zwijnski, the event was not a failure as he considered it as a local activity. So this was the term he's used to name the actions in context that exposed and confronted the participants' situations. Misunderstandings and frustrations were in fact, according to him, part of the process of, I quote him, provoking a situation in which people would be able to express their attitude toward their own reality, end of quote. As a matter of fact, the difficulties in establishing a true dialogue between all the participants gave rise on the European and Canadian side to a compelling need to self-organize. For Amerigo Marras, I quote, "The Toronto seminars were simply the beginning for a platform of a new consciousness emerging in various countries with the same intensity and similar directions." End of quote. The same view was expressed by Hervé Fischer. I quote, "My idea would be that I consider this seminar as something very interesting and maybe important, even if the differences between us seem very big, because it's the first time that people working in Europe, East and West Europe, and in North America come together to discuss the possibility of using art as a way of changing society." End of quote. Jan Zwijnski, on his side, later observed, and I quote again, "On the one hand, we were demolishing the existing international structure of the art world artistic community, and on the other hand, we sought to restore relationships based on new principles, not on mutual competition and hierarchy, but on solidarity." End of quote. New consciousness, changing society, demolishing to bring new principles in solidarity, a revolutionary repertoire expressed on both sides of the Iron Curtain. And here I open a parenthesis on the issue of Cold War solidarities. The phenomenon of solidarity during the Cold War period is closely linked to the existence of great narratives, which have helped to maintain a polarized vision of international relations. In her book, Solidarity and Spectatorship, Lili Shuliaraki points at the coexistence of two important historical variations of the meaning of solidarity. On the one hand, solidarity as salvation, which surged as a moral response to the war's atrocity and gave birth to today's humanitarian practices. And on the other hand, solidarity as revolution, which is the one that interests us here, which directly emanated from Marxian militantism. Involved in processes of political, social, and racial struggles across the globe, this form of solidarity operated as a strong motor for change and the instauration of a new world order based on redistribution and social justice. solidarity as revolution was institutionalized on the one hand through Marxist political parties and their networks of collaboration, like the Socialist International, functioning both in the West and the East, and on the other hand, beyond the North Atlantic axis, through anti-colonial movements and activism in the Third World and the Global South. So one of the questions I would like to raise here is whether and how an artistic network like the Third Front reflected this form of solidarity as revolution. I would like to suggest that a first element of answer lies in its members' desire to operate in reality. And one of the ways to do so was for them to decentralize the art world, creating jointly new spaces to undermine the foundations of the capitalist art world and its uncontested authority. So if on the one hand, Zwijinski's ideas on contextual art were strongly criticized for remaining at a theoretical level and not offering keys for a real and effective practice, on the other hand, it was seen as an opportunity to subvert and undo the relation between artistic centers and peripheries. The art historian Lucas Ronduda observed that by insisting on the specificity of spatial and temporal coordinates against a set of imposed aesthetics and practices, contextual art could potentially operate as a weapon. It challenged the canons and artistic models imported from the centers, United States and Western Europe, but also Soviet Union, allowing artists from the so-called peripheries to engage into concrete experiments with a strong relation to their proper environment. In fact, Zwijinski rejected the use of imported aesthetics models as an attitude of subordination he considered as a provincial behavior, and there is a quote on this. As Anna Markowska has noted, Zwijinski's decomplexed attitude allowed young contextualist artists to have confidence in their own practice and to assume their choices without worrying about their adequacy in an international context. The question of the organization of peripheries and the decentralization of the art world was at the core of the international conference titled Art as Activity in the Context of Reality, organized by Zwijinski at the Remont Gallery in Warsaw in June 1977. It involved artists from more than 30 countries and was the occasion to reaffirm the needs for a joint action. For the first time, the scope of the Third Front, already composed by a Polish-Canadian group that had been consolidating itself over different encounters, was expanded towards south through the person of the founder of the Centro de Arte y Comunicación in Buenos Aires, Jorge Glusberg. The inclusion of a Latin American art scene sponsored by Glusberg, and this was the point of view of the other members of the Third Front, Glusberg as a figure embodying all the Latin American arts. This inclusion introduced a new geographical dimension in the previous agreement, expanding the scope of the Third Front towards south and reaffirming its intentions to decentralize the art world. Central in the discourses, the issue of decentralization was a strong common denominator, which temporarily suspended other differences among a heterogeneous group of artists, active in the margins, or what they considered to be margins, of socialist and capitalist empires. Among the artists who participated in the conference in Warsaw were the members of a collective from the Balearic Islands in Spain, called Neon de Suro. One of its members, Teva Terrades, observed connections between the group and artists active in the Polish context, and I quote Terrades. Both rejected the individual character of any work of art and defended the idea of art as a social reality. They also believed that a work of art should reflect liaison between the artist's conscience and the social reality. End of quote. Neon de Suro insisted on the self-managed nature of its practice, which focused on the production of a newspaper, Neon de Suro, at the origin of the collective's name. The group sought to apply the principles of decentralization and art grounded in its local context, in this case the Mediterranean. While Neon de Suro was not involved in the third front, its aspirations are worth mentioning insofar as they strongly resonate with the concerns of its members. It was certainly not the only one showing these affinities, and this research still has to be done. And actually, I also found a reference for a conference or an encounter that took place in Italy. That was titled, I only know the title, but it was Contestualità sociale, like social contextuality. So I will go on researching. And now I am arriving to the conclusion. The third front didn't last very long. The processes and relationships that accompanied its developments were not free of internal struggles for power and visibility, and they were also not deprived of inner contradictions and also lack of self-criticism in a way. While its origins can be found in Toronto's symposium at the end of 1976, after the Paris seminar, the idea of a joint position and action was only discussed in two other gatherings in Warsaw and Kazimierz in Poland, before it dissolved with the configuration of other alliances. Diverging views and above all diverging interests with regard to their position in the international art scene led some of its members to leave the Third Front project behind. Still in 1977, a bit later, representatives from Toronto SIAC were invited to the Violence and Behavior workshop at Joseph Beuys Free International University at Documenta 6, highlighting important contradictions within their confrontational attitude toward the art worlds. On this occasion, the rupture was completed and each part pursued its own path in contact with other groups and artists. The idea of an art attached to its context, rejecting any authority, both from institutions and the art market, was very simple and could even be considered from a certain point of view as naive. However, it brought together artists from different backgrounds and geographies, leading them to form a community in movement that aspired to weave and strengthen links despite its members' variety of strategies and fields of actions. Despite its generic character, the idea of a contextual practice managed to bring these artists together, making them believe in the relevance of their work regardless of the attractive force of the big centers. And finally, I don't want to close this presentation without mentioning the role of women artists in this third front as an issue that deserves also to be more explored, since, as I could observe, there is a true difference in the documentation and reports from the events I have mentioned between the visibility of these women artists and that of especially the three main figures that were a bit the founders of the third front. So the case of Anna Kutera, for example, was a representative of the Polish contextualist art, but also Lauren Leeson's position should be also considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Juliane. I think we have some. We are gonna gather all the questions.
Thank you very much. I had never heard about this, so it's really a fascinating topic. You've mentioned circulation of their ideas throughout the International, for instance, Communist International. What struck me when listening to your presentation was how fluidly this Swieczynski's character seemed to be traveling from Warsaw to Paris, all the way to Toronto. In 1977, it seems he was very free in his movements for an artist with a critical look on the politics and stuff like this. Did you think it had anything to do with the context of the Helsinki Charter, that he had this freedom? And do you have any interest or any information on how, for instance, the Polish government considered the contextualist art movement, or perhaps in the West, if they were under the scrutiny of I don't know, police, or Secret Service, were they considered a threat by either West or East? Thank you.
Thank you, Juliane. Very interesting. And I have several things that when I was listening to your talk. First, I'm very interested about this idea of the marginal and how they actually are. I understood that they are stressing the idea of marginality, and I was wondering if, by any chance, because for time, and also there is this photograph of Hervé Fischer, which Montadas is in the list of exhibitors, because the idea of marginality is a key issue for the group de Travail, working on the marginals, and this was a point that actually they defended, and I was reading, and you have Montadas and Rabascal and people from around this kind of conceptual art in Catalonia. So which brings me to the second point, the interest, the importance of rehabilitating terms, historical terms, because with this kind of obsession of the global and thinking global and the global conceptualism, of course, there are synergies and connections with conceptual art and this contextualist, but with this terminology of global conceptualism, it disappears fluidly, in the discussion. So I find this very interesting. And the third point is about how open the third front was. Was it a connection of friends or people that they understood each other, that they were doing similar practices, and they met suddenly in Toronto and decided to do this work together? Or there was an internationalist ambition in a way, for example, compared to the new tendencies? For example, in the 1960s, I was wondering if there was this kind of ambition and that didn't work. And I also was thinking that in Toronto, around that time, there was a huge event connected to the ICA, and I don't know if they had they were actually at the same time, but I don't know. Thank you. These are my questions.
Thank you for your work. I just wanted to point out that there's Jorge Glusberg on one of the photos. I think he is under another name.
I wasn't sure, actually.
Yeah, that's him.
I put
no doubt.
First, I had.
Yeah, the one at the top,
Okay.
Up there, that's Jorge Glusberg.
This one?
In a very 70s sort of fashion. The one at the top.
Okay, because he's very
On the
similar to Gajewski, and some people.
No,
said
but he has more white hair.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's him.
Okay.
There's no doubt. The Argentine team here.
Thank you.
Recognize him. And it's interesting. And this is linked to Paula's question on how fluid also was this idea of context. And because Jorge Glusberg, he was operating in Buenos Aires since '69 at least, with the CAIC, the Centro de Arte y Comunicación. And he was really willing to connect local artists into the international sort of arena, and the international arena can be central or peripheral cities. When you come from Buenos Aires, it's not that different. So everything is central in a way. So I don't know. I think and that I wanted to know more about that exhibition in Warsaw in '77, and before I see that CAIC is participating in another exhibition in Warsaw in '75. So there's a sort of international network, which is not necessarily on the third. What's the name? Sorry, the third front.
Just to add, yes. Just to add to what Isabel told you, there is a certain link, a definite link with Latin America, and I think that in 1977, Teresa Burga, which is a conceptual artist, She made a sociological experiment with a woman sociologist, and I'm sure that they were linked to Hervé Fischer's thinking. So I think that's definitely a relationship that you should. I think that you should research on.
I would like to make another connection to Jorge Glusberg, because Jorge Glusberg was in Yugoslavia as well. I will mention this tomorrow a little bit. But I know him that he was involved in two occasions. One was being a selector at the International Biennial of Graphic Art in Ljubljana. And the second one, he was a curator in one of the very small towns in north of Slovenia. In 1975, I will mention briefly this tomorrow, exhibition called Peace. So he selected artists from Latin America for that exhibition. And the second comment would be, I think it was your question, Paula, how they operated this artist, these conceptual things in Poland, who supported this. And for the case of Yugoslavia, which I think it's in many ways similar to that of Poland, that was state that provided the finances. And how they provided the finances, organizing the special centers called student cultural centers, which were in Slovenia, in Croatia, in Serbia, in Bosnia, and then they could do basically whatever they wanted. For example, in Belgrade, in Serbia, they had events with hosting art and language, Josip Košut, Joseph Beuys. They also organized one event in 73 or 4. It was a support solidarity with Latin America, more specifically with Chile. So but it was state supported. They tolerated this, and that was it. I don't know in Poland, maybe it was a bit similar, but Yugoslavia was in many ways different than Poland.
Okay. So I'm gonna finish with just a comment. Not to answer, just maybe it will be worth exploring all that sociology connotates in this year, because I was thinking that maybe this idea of Kossuth of relating this contextual to anthropology, while it's more about sociology. So maybe that will be also a way to explore things just that.
Okay, so thank you so much for all the comments and questions. I will go from the last to the first. Regarding Glusberg, well, actually, he was like he was omnipresent, I think, in the art scene, and so yes, he was. I think it was not the first time he was in Poland, and he was connected with many artists. I don't know if he organized an exhibition of Polish artists at CAIC, but for example, there was an exhibition of Hungarian artists and probably also other artists from Eastern Europe. But there was also this international video encounters CAIC was organizing, so there were several sessions in different European countries. And actually, Amerigo Marras from SIAC, he had been participating in one of these video encounters, and that's a little bit how he discovered CAIC, and probably his discourse on the idea of consciousness, etc., was also borrowed in a way from Glusberg. So I think there is like all these persons were in a way influencing each others and taking all these terminologies from one another. Regarding the situation in Poland, as Bojana was asking, the galleries where these artists were active, the Remont, for example, and also the new recent art gallery in Wrocław, they were students' galleries. So in a way, they were state supported. And basically, they at that time in the 70s in Poland, as far as there was not a direct critique to the regime, experimental practices could take place. So there was like this margin, in doing practices. I have to say that the figure of Zwijnski is quite an ambiguous and a mysterious figure for me, And as far as I could study, he has provoked, there is a kind of division in the art historiography, at least the Polish art historiography about him, because for example, Piotr Piotrowski, who's a reference, he didn't like it, him. Probably because he thought that claiming for arts autonomy or something outside of the sphere of political art was not maybe courageous enough, no, to face the regime, etc. And also somehow maybe it seems that Zwijnski could have been also connected with the secret police, but it is some information that still has to be verified. Unfortunately, I don't have access to all the Polish files, and that would be definitely interesting to know more about that. I have to be quick. Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Because if not, then it's not gonna talk
regarding
at all, so.
the issue of marginality, you're right, Paula. This is, I think, a very important term, and also I think I am interested in working on this conjunction of terms like marginality but also decentralization in relation with the practice that was also trying to get out of the conceptual language by proposing this idea of contextual or sociological art, which in a way was also very close to conceptual language, but the fact of formulating it, I think, was also important, and I would like to explore why it was formulated in these terms and what kind of alliance they were trying to make. And regarding the issue of freedom and Zwijnski and his circulation, well, this is what I mentioned, that he could get some visa to travel, and at that time it was not so complicated to travel. And actually after SIAC in Toronto, he and Anna Kutera were invited to New York. They went to Kossut's studio, and he organized some visits for them. And so that's why also this idea of third front is a bit ambiguous, because in the end they were criticizing very much this idea of New York scene and so on, but what they were looking forward, I think, was really to make contacts and establish relations, not necessarily being involved in this scene, but at least foster exchanges and dialogues. And I think, I don't know if I have left something.
Okay, thank you, Juliane. So I'm gonna introduce Anita. So Anita is a PhD candidate in 2 or 3 places. In between is a third front in herself. So she researches curatorial practices in the relationship between the Venice Biennial and biennials in Latin America and the Caribbean. And she has participated in some conferences, and she also graduated in Italy in conservation of cultural heritage and in Madrid. And now, okay.
Okay. Okay. So, first of all, I would like to thank for organizing the conference and for accepting my paper. I'll speak about the Havana Biennial, the 3rd edition, so I think that I can start. The Havana Biennial is a collective will. With this word, Hilda Maria Rodriguez recognizes transnational solidarity The Havana Biennial is a collective will. With these words, Hilda Maria Rodriguez recognizes transnational solidarity as a supporting pillar of the Havana Biennial. She refers both to the existence of a common project, I quote, "We share the same view and walk the same path," and to the no less important material aid received. Nelson Herrera Isla also highlights how many intellectual, artistic and curatorial networks of solidarity were generated with the research trips in situ. Solidarity is at the same time a constitutive and transversal element of the Havana Biennial. The solidarity of the project itself, that is, being a platform for research, exhibition and promotion, a meeting point and a forum for debate on the artistic production of the Third World, the reception of solidarity exhibition that lie within a broad and complex geopolitical and artistic framework at an international level, the alliances with other biennials, the solidarity networks that are established to support their materialization, for example, the sending of material, or the catalog financing, or to promote the event in a specialized environment. On this occasion, I will analyze how the funding purposes of the Wilfredo Lam Center, together with the problem faced by the Center curatorial team, determine, on the one hand, the conformation of the triangular structure of the Havana Biennial, and on the other hand, mapping strategies that lend to the creation of intellectual and curatorial solidarity networks. I will also show how, in these first editions, the Havana Biennial was both the recipient and promoter of solidarity exhibitions that placed the Havana within a network and transnational solidarity community. In 1989, the Havana Biennial celebrated its third edition with a triangular structure, exhibitions, workshops, and theoretical events, better delineated with respect to the two previous editions. In fact, in this edition, a theme of reflection is established, that is, tradition and contemporaneity in the art of the Third World. The sections are focused so that they revolve around this theme, and the competitive character of the event is eliminated, and the division by nationality is abandoned. The first two editions can be defined as experimental, as from the Ministry of Culture before, and from the Wilfredo Lam Center curatorial team later, the Western's biennial format with a jury, awards, and division by nationality was adapted to the foundational purposes of the center. The Havana Biennial will not only have to be a place to exhibit the extensive, intensive, and rich variety of artistic expression of what was then known as the Third World, but also a platform from where to submit to judgment and debates its theoretical and critical inquiries, and from where to promote an horizontal dialogue. To make these purposes tangible, the event is articulated in conceptually communicative and interconnected sections. The exhibitions, the main one and the special project, are configured as an essay through which to exhibit a theme and offer multiple points of view. The workshop among artists or with the participation of the public have to promote the exchange between artists from many countries, contribute to the development and enrichment of Cuban artists, and facilitate the approach and participation of the local public at the event. The theoretical event aims to enrich the conceptual character of the event and generate reflection. Analyzing the structure, analyzing of this triangular structure, the speaker at the meeting, the artist invited to the workshop or special exhibition project make it possible to highlight how the Havana Biennial is crossed by intellectual networks articulated around common projects and shared horizons. In the theoretical event, it is possible to identify, on the one hand, intellectual network in Latin America already active in the 70s and which find in the Havana Biennial a new space for debate, and, on the other hand, curatorial networks that are generated in and from a research trip. To demonstrate this, I'll give as an example the participation in the theoretical event of the third Havana Biennial, that is Tradition and Contemporaneity in the Visual Art of the Third World, the title of the theoretical event. Here, Juanacha, who also participate in the second theoretical event, Mirko Lauer, Federico Moraes participate, also Gita Kapoor also participate, and a common point in this lecture is the analysis of the notion of modernity, tradition, and contemporaneity in their local context in opposition to the West. In addition, all of them emphasize the importance of establish horizontal relationship between the visual art of the third world countries as an alternative to the historical mediation carried out by the Euro-American Cultural Center. However, it's interesting to know how, on this occasion, Mirko Lauer and Federico Moraes make reference to the biennial reality in Latin America. To explain the context in a nutshell, in the 80s, the biennial format was already widespread in Latin America. Many of these biennial were points of advanced cultural colonization, to quote Federico Moraes, since they adopted the format of Venice with jury and awards, pursued Western aims, for example, Sao Paulo Biennial, and were financed with North American capital, for example, Cordoba and Coltejar Biennial, in addition to calling on Western curators to curate to the biennial or to be part of the jury. There are very few attempts to forge a format appropriate to local specificity, and one of them is the Latin America Biennial of Sao Paulo in 1978. Juanacha, Mirko Lauer, and Federico Moraes belong to the network of Latin American intellectuals who believe that the format of Western biennials is not adapted to Latin America, and advocate as a counterpart a research biennial specialized in a technique or a geographical area without a word and with a strong reflexive component, that is, with a symposium. They consider this formula the most effective to research artistic production in the region, to foment mutual knowledge interchange, and to encourage exchange and relations between artists and critics from different regions. The purposes and the format of the tourized research biennial have many points in common with Havana, although it changed the geographical references area. In the case of Havana, not only Latin America and the Caribbean, but also Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. An example of the research biennial is the first Latin America Biennial of Sao Paulo in 1978, dedicated exclusively to Latin American countries without awards and with a strong reflexive component, the symposium Myths and Magic. It's not a coincidence that Mirko Lauer, throughout his lecture at the theoretical event of the Havana Biennial, indicates, I quote, "The Latin America Biennial of Sao Paulo, inspired by Juanacha, is the most direct precursor of this Havana Biennial." Gita Kapoor also participates in this theoretical event. Her participation can be considered the result of the meetings and alliances generated by the research trips in situ. Before moving on the case of India, I consider it important to specify the reason for these trips and how they are carried out. As the Havana Biennial was an event dedicated to the artistic production of the Third World, the curatorial team of the Wilfredo Lama Center knew that their knowledge about the artistic production of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East was very scarce, and that they would have to visit these countries in person because they couldn't trust in the official representation sent by embassies and governments. Because of this, and as the Ministry of Culture, not understanding the importance of the research trip, is not willing to financing this trip, two strategies are used to visit countries, to get to know the local art scenes, and to establish contacts with artists. The first one is the use of bilateral agreements, cultural agreements, to exchange exhibition. The curatorial team of the Havana Biennial prepares and offers an exhibition made to Maison, to these countries, with the condition that a curator of the Wilfredo Lama Center travel to the place. The second one is to take advantage of all invitation to different events. In both cases, the trips are extended to carry out the research in situ. And this trip make the curator of the Wilfredo Lama Center specialized in geographical area. So in 1985, the India Triennial invites the Wilfredo Lama Center to attend to the event. On this occasion, it's Nelson Herrera Isla who attends to the Triennial. On this trip, Nelson Herrera Isla not only corroborates part of the selection of the Indian artists previously made for the second Havana Biennial, but discover new artists to invite to the second Havana Biennial. For example, Vivan Sundaran and Nalini Malani. He also depends his knowledge of artists from New Delhi and identifies Gita Kapoor as a key figure. A first unsuccessful attempt to involve Gita Kapoor in the theoretical event of the second biennial is achieved in the third. Her participation evidences that, I quote Margarita Gonzalez, that is a curator of the Wilfredo Lama Center, so the participation of Gita Kapoor evidences the proximity of the approaches that were being postulated at that time by both countries, India and Cuba, were approaches that would lead to the transformation of the international artistic scenes. In an interview, Nelson Herrera Isla identifies the India Triennial as a conventional exhibition with a nationalistic approach curated by, I quote, very orthodox and not very flexible academic who want to exhibit recognized artists and who are not interested in young or women artists. This artistic scenes, which has no place in the India Triennial, is interested in the dilemma between the local and the international in making art a wide-ranging social tool and in proposing alternative paths to reflection on nation and identity. There are two exhibitions in India in the 80s where these proposals are reflected. Place for People in 1981, curated by Gita Kapoor, and Questions and Dialogue. This debate, as I said, have no place in the India Triennial, but they do match the issue raised by the Havana. Moreover, they complemented them. In fact, these common interests are seen in the India participation in the Havana Biennial. Ohen Koduri, Sudur Patnar, Nalini Malani, and also Vivan Surdaran are artists who participated in both Place for People and Question and Dialogue, as well as in the second and in the third Havana Biennial. In the case of bilateral agreements for exchanging exhibitions, I would like to mention the case of Africa. During the preparations of the second Havana Biennial, the exhibition Africa Within Cuba, curated by Gerardo Mosquera, is prepared and sent to Angola and Mozambique. During this research trip, Gerardo Mosquera came into contact with the local artistic milieu and made a first selection of artists invited to the Havana Biennial. Just a short note, if I may. I would like to emphasize the words first selection, because even if a curator visits an area, the final name selection is a team effort. In fact, after these trips, all the curators of the Wilfred Ollama Center meet, analyze the collected material, and discuss the pre-selection to make a final one. Again, I would like to highlight that two of the African artists selected for the second Havana Biennial had also participated in the first Bantu Art Biennial in Gabon, 1985. Luzano Dombashi and Emile Mokoko. Emile Mokoko was also co-president of the Bantu Artists Association. The Bantu Art Biennial, organized by and within the political project of the International Center of Bantu Civilization, is a biennial dedicated to promoting and preserving the Bantu visual arts in their purest format and free from Western influences. In 1987, the second edition takes place, and it includes an exhibition of the Bantu diaspora with the Cuban artists. This exhibition of Bantu diaspora with Cuban artists is curated by Gerardo Mosquera, and in that edition, in the second edition of the Bantu Art Biennial, Gerardo Mosquera was also part of the jury. The purposes of this exhibit, I can show some artists that participate both in the Havana Biennial and in Bantu Art Biennial. In the catalogue of Bantu Art Biennial, apart from referring to the work research carried out by the Wilfred Ollama Center, the biennial makes it a point to emphasize the way in which Cuban artists of Bantu origin try to recover the cultural value of their African ancestor in reaction to the intrusion of the Western value in their initial ontology and cosmology. This collaboration with the Bantu Art Biennial was useful from the Wilfred Ollama Center to learn more about Bantu artists whose participation continues at the Havana Biennial. Yerli Meppo and Daniel Gauca participate in the exhibition Third World of the Third Havana Biennial, as well as in the second Bantu Art Biennial. On the other hand, always within the mapping strategies, the exhibition of the Bantu diaspora is also sent to Gabon, Zambia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria, and Gerardo Mosquera visits these countries accompanying the exhibition. These research trips are also reflected in the third edition of the Havana Biennial, in which the presence of artists of African countries increase, and there is a workshop related to the traditional technique of denim fabric to decorate clothes is one of the knowledge exchange opportunities that take place between the public and the artist. Solidarity exhibition. As I said at the beginning, the Havana Biennial was both the recipient and promoter of a solidarity exhibition, which placed the Havana Biennial within a network and transnational solidarity community, which used mailing art and photography as a form and platform of resistance and a channel for political denunciation. In the first case, Desaparecidos Políticos de Nuestra América is an exhibition of mail art promoted by Solidarte Mexico. The state objective was to bring to light more than 9,000 political disappearances reported in Guatemala, Argentina, Bolivia, Paraguay, El Salvador, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, and even Mexico. Solidarte Mexico requested that the authors send 2 works, one for the Havana Biennial and the other for the Museo Nacional de Chopo in Mexico, to be displayed at the same time. The following years, this exhibition is presented in Montevideo thanks to the mediation of the Uruguayan Association of Mail Artists. In the second case, Te Queremos Paraguay is an exhibition of male art proposed by Clemente Padin to the Committee of Assistance to the Paraguayan People in repudiation of the dictatorship in Paraguay. The exhibition is presented in Montevideo in 1988 and in 1989 traveled to the third Havana Biennial. According to Nelson Herrera Isla, this exhibition is chosen not only as an act of solidarity with Paraguay, but also as a subterfuge for Paraguay to be present at the event, since, due to the dictatorship, the country had been inaccessible to the biennial previously. Fotos Censuradas de Chile is an exhibition denouncement composed of those photos that, after having survived their censorship and burning, have traveled to German and have crossed back the Atlantic with Havana as their destination, where they are currently located. In the spring of 1984, the Association of the Independent Photographers of Chile organized the exhibition Fotos Censuradas in Santiago de Chile. This gathered a set of protest images from 1983 and 1984. Days after its inauguration, the exhibition was censored by the police. Some of these photos traveled to Germany, and the Chilean German Cultural Center keeps them. The curatorial team of the Wilfred Owen Center are aware of the existence of this exhibition thanks to a trip by Lilian Yanes to Germany in 1987. Lilian Yanes in that period was the director of the Wilfred Owen Center. So it's once again a research trip to promote solidarity alliances. Fotos Censuradas de Chile is one of the many exhibition initiative abroad to support the return to democracy in Chile in the 70s and in the 80s. You can see some of them, for example, Freedom from Chile in Venice, 1976, Arts Festival for Democracy in Chile in London, or Margins and Institution in Australia, a traveling exhibition in Australia, Chile Vive in Madrid in 1987, and Cirugía Plástica in Berlin in 1989. Among all these, I would like to highlight the two exhibitions that were known in Cuba in that time, that were Chile Vive and Cirugía Plástica, in order to analyze the Chilean participation in the fourth Havana Biennial, that is titled The Challenge to Colonization. In fact, the achievement made by Cirugía Plástica laid the criteria for the selection of the Chilean artists selected in that edition, in addition to inviting Nelly Richard to the theoretical events and making her participate in the catalogue with a text. Firstly, I would like to highlight the antagonistic aspect of two exhibitions. Chile Vive is a mega exhibition which, including photography, architecture, painting, sculpture, literature, offer a holistic view of the artistic production that took place in Chile between 1973 and 1987. The problem with this exhibition is that it doesn't take into account the fact that the pool of opposition culture didn't act as an uniform pole. In fact, it was an ordinary and comprehensive display of a fragmented national scenes. Cirugía Plástica evidences the aesthetic and political disagreements of the contestatory position, favoring the representation of the so-called escena avanzada and leaving out, I quote Nelly Richard, the more orthodox composing painting. The selection of the Chilean just the last thing that I think that is important is Speaking about the fourth Havana Biennial, the fourth Havana Biennial is organized around a theme that is challenges to colonization, which is conceptually related to the third edition. Considering the discursive, collaborative, and participative aspect of the Havana, I consider it important to highlight an informal meeting that is organized during the celebration of the third edition, with a small group of artists and experts from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. This meeting, the purpose of this meeting is analyze the third edition together and explore the thematic possibility for the fourth edition. One of the points discussed in this meeting are the activities promoted by Spain for the 5th centenary of the discovery of America. Speaking of this meeting, Lilian Yanes remembers how Nelly Richard participated in this meeting and highlight her contribution. I quote, Nelly Richard made has seen the importance of not missing the opportunity to draw attention to the way in which this historic event was being focused. In the essay, in the catalogue of Chirurgia Plastica, Nelly Richard addressed the same issue. Speaking about the dichotomy of exhibitions made in and from abroad, she analyzed two cases. The first one is the Chilean contestatory case, and the second one is the Latin primitivist case. Regarding the Latin primitivist case, Nelly Richards warns of the danger of the museum celebration of the 5th anniversary as recolonization through commemoration. This informal meeting is an example of how the Havana Biennial wants to be a platform for a meeting and debate, where the transnational circulation of people and ideas and intellectual network articulating around a common project are reflected. I would also like to emphasize that this meeting was only the starting point of the work done by the Wilfredo Lama Center Curatorial team for the next edition. This meeting will be followed by others in which the only participants will be the Curatorial team of the Wilfredo Lama Center to discuss the theme of the third Havana Biennial in depth. Finally, it is decided to address the colonization issue, establishing a dialogue between the past, the conquest, and the present, the consequences of colonization and neo-colonization. And this is the images of the fourth Havana Biennial. So just a short conclusion. If the fourth Havana Biennial is titled The Challenge to Colonization, Nelson Herrera Isla title is Essay, Challenges of a Biennial in the catalogue of this edition, with the wild irony of double reading, which so characterizes his writing. He talks about the geological project of the Havana Biennial throughout the partially achievement arising from tangible difficulty and absencing. In fact, the conjuncture of this element is what has directed the Havana Biennial in its first edition, both in terms of format and in terms of a line of research and strategies to obtain information and establish desired contact. What I have presented in this paper is a first and partial work towards tracking the alliances and intellectual network that are generated on the one hand in and from the research trips, and on the other hand within a complex and broad geopolitical map of solidarity exhibition. The traced cartography, more than the final result, are a tool for a deeper analysis. And it is so that returning to some of this cartography, I wonder, have they been occasional collaboration or starting point for a long-lasting partnership? What other alliances can be established in and from research trips? Are solidarity dialogues established with any other exhibition? What has been the reception and impact of traveling exhibitions in local contexts? Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you, Anita, for showing us a big map through the case of Havana Biennial. And I was thinking about all of this all day, and right now with your example, it is more vivid to me. And it seems I wanted to ask you because, you know, for example, there is Galicia coast was a wonderful place to foster smuggling, you know, historically. And actually, since the 16th century, Galicia is in Spain, you know, has a network created of smuggling that changed through centuries. And in the 1960s and 70s, it came to Baker, and it was very successful. At a point, I'm going to the point of solidarity, just bear with me a moment. And so it was so well organized, and almost all the tobacco that arrived illegally came through Galicia, that when the narcos in Colombia, in Latin America, had to find a place to organize this kind of networks, they had the perfect place because everything was set already in motion. So all this kind of smuggling that at the beginning started as a way of survivance during the dictatorship transformed in the best and the best organized cartel of drugs dealing in the north of Spain that full drugs through Europe in the 1980s. I think the 90% of drugs appear in Galicia, through Galicia. So why I'm thinking about that when I listen to your talk, because I'm wondering how, in so far, these connections that the Havana Biennial is creating are not already part of formalized networks of solidarity that were created before through, for example, the Tricontinental or whatever we have seen today here. Mm-hmm. And so it would be worth, of course, to think from this point forward, but to see in these agents that they are being organized through this Wilfredo Lanz Center, how they were connected to this network. If you see India and Africa, actually these were all the networks of the Tricontinental. This is my example on the drug dealing in Galicia. So I mean, but I think it's a good parallelism, and it's worth thinking about it. And I was thinking about how networks of solidarity, because someone was telling that about Chile, I think it was Laura, how spaces of solidarity transform when different causes arrive, and because they were organized, so they took another cause and they organized and they use also the cause, I think in Amsterdam. No? This is my comment and question. And thank you.
Yeah, I'm going in the same direction as Paula, because it seems like the 80s were, I mean, the Havana Biennial is somehow putting together several networks already set before. On the one hand, there's ACHA, and there's a whole discussion of art critics in Latin America about Latin American art during the 60s, but especially the 70s, and Fabiana has done her PhD research on that. But also there's already the network of mail art being somehow circulating throughout the 70s, and Clemente Padin activities in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because in terms of aesthetics, it's very heterogeneous. I mean, there's a confluence of many different things, and somehow that is very into the 80s spirit in a way. I don't know. But yes, I think it's interesting to make sort of a genealogy. I can't speak any language more.
Thank you, Anita. I was wondering, do you perhaps know of the exhibition in 1995, which is a little bit later, and that was not a biennial, but exhibition, it was called Contemporary Art Exhibition of the Non-Aligned Countries, and it happened in Jakarta, Indonesia.
No.
Because it might be interesting also for your research, because they were participants from all these non-aligned countries from that time, and among others also from Cuba. I'm not that familiar with the situation in Cuba, but you mentioned Margarita Gonzalez. She was in Ljubljana a couple of weeks ago. We were going through that exhibition that I'm going to talk about tomorrow, and we actually discussed this particular project in Jakarta, because nothing, it's like it's completely forgotten. No one knows anything about it. Even the people who were participating forgot about it. And that's probably the reason, because it was organized by the Indonesian president at that time, which was very problematic. But so that would be maybe one link for you to further research, because it's quite interesting. And also Gita Kapoor was present, and they had this very interesting debates on the and symposia on the contemporary art of the global south. So all these questions they were addressing that we're kind of tackling today. But this you can find on Gita Kapoor's site. So that's a little comment.
Just one quick comment on the timing that I think is embedded, but I think would be interesting to think about enunciating, is that the conferences that are taking place in Latin America, at least in the Southern Cone, in this period, they're all very recently returning to democracy, right? So that the timing of hosting these conferences, especially in contrast to Paraguay, that it remains under dictatorship, and the sort of solidarity and the sort of renewed interest, right, in holding these international spaces when for a decade or more they weren't able to in many places.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I think that the connection between the Havana Biennial and the Tricontinental is evident. I mean, it's like Havana Biennial is like the tricontinental making art. I think that we can say something like this about the way in which the curatorial team of the Wilfredo de Lama Center connected to this place. There are very different way. They use bilateral agreement for exchanging exhibition, as I say before, but they also use personal contact with people and with the embassy in this country. And I would like to point out the role of the embassies and official governments in the first editions of the Havana Biennial, because they received the material for selected the embassies and the embassies send the material of the artist, and then the curatorial team of the Havana Biennial make the selection, and they decided to travel directly to the country, because they supposed that the material that they received is like the official artistic presentation. And with respect to the connection of Latin America, they use a lot the key role that has been Casa de las Américas during the 70s, and the contact that there are between Casa de las Américas and the other countries. To make you an example, I think that a good example to explain the role of Casa de las Américas in the contact between other Latin American country in the 70s is that in the first Havana Biennial there isn't a selection of artists, there is just a call, And using the contact that they have with Casa de las Americas, they distribute the coal in Latin America. And the only thing that an artist has to do to participate in the Havana Biennial is send the coal with the art pieces. So there isn't a selection in the first Havana Biennial. And I think that this is an important point to highlight the role of Casa de las Americas in the first edition. Also to say that during the second and third edition, the research trips are in Asia and Africa, and just from the fourth Havana Biennial, they start to research directly in South America. And I don't. And I know that the tricontinental is important, and that I have less to look back, but yeah, I know that is a point that is missing in this moment in my research.
Well, I would say it has to do with a new form in which you shape this soft power. Because before there were some formats of exhibitions, but the biennial adds another layer and functions differently, and you have to research. You have not to just assume what you have been sent. So they are proactive and they establish new links. So the format also the function changed the organ. So the exhibitions weren't as they used to be, like this exchange of solidarity exhibitions, but they produced that. They were more performing than representing, I think, these things. And also because of the 80s, they were like more eclectic in a way, or they were dealing with other things like tradition, maybe. I mean, that's my... So because I was all these three talks, understanding that it's not soft power, it's like Isabel was saying, soft resistance. So this is the construction of alternative institutional forms to deal and to challenge the already existing exhibitions. So in this case, it's very clear that they want to build an alternative biennial system opposed to the Western model, Venice biennial model. So they start as kind of resistance, subterfugio, whatever. And in all the three cases, there were some kind of tricks going on, no? In the three, so they were very, very subversive, like the Arpilleras or like the Third Front, because they needed to build this other parallel and parasite system.
Well, the thing is, yes, of course, and it is interesting to know what they took from before and what are building new.
Yeah.
This is the thing, because probably they use connections, but to build something else.
Yeah,
and to make clear what connections were used and how they build other things. This is interesting, I think. Anyway, yes, this is part of the discussion for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because it's 8, 6
because it's 6 o'clock.